Okay. Well, I should begin by saying that the test maker, before the test is made, a content area begins with this document. These are your standards, and every content area has this document that dictates what they must know and what they must be able to do in the classroom. So this is the document for you. And this is the document that TEA, the Texas Education Agency, sends to the test maker. So they send this to Pearson, and then Pearson rearranges however they want for the purposes of the domains and the competencies. Since you've already taken it and you know what competencies need particular attention, and I'll ask you that in just a little bit, and we'll look at your scores and see which ones you need to pay most attention to. But looking at your scores, you can identify areas of weakness in order to do a very deep dive into that area so that you can be prepared for the exam. Now, not everything as far as the wrong response has to do with you not knowing the pedagogy or the content area. Sometimes it's a matter of not carefully reading, not mindfully reading the scenario, paying attention to what age group and grade level, paying attention to other details or hints that they offer you in the scenario so that you can choose the best response. Because often they don't just give you one appropriate response. They will give you more than one appropriate response. However, one is more appropriate than the other based on those particulars, those details that they gave you within the scenario. So doing well on this exam is not just knowing the content back and forth like memorized. It's also being able to carefully read the scenarios, the questions, to identify what is the goal for the health science teacher in this scenario. What area of science are they focused on? What task or activity does the health science teacher want to strengthen? And then what answer best responds to those things I identified. So let's take a look at the way that it's broken down. We know that it's a 5-hour exam.
Mhm.
And for the purposes of just analogy and clarification, the equivalent to a critical reading 5-hour exam would be a physical marathon. If you were to run a marathon with your body, it would be equivalent to taking a 5-hour critical reading content specific exam. So act like it the day before you go take it. Make sure you're not studying on that day. Don't make your brain do any sort of cognitive, exhaustive activities. You should be done before the day before, where you can just rest, focus on, visualize yourself being successful, eat healthy, rest, and then wake up the next day ready to run your cognitive marathon. Okay. So here are your other domains. Do you have domain 1, which covers health science standards, the document that we looked at, 1, and that's worth 19%. Then you have medical sciences worth another 19%. And again, you see standard 1. So 19 and 19 is going to be, what is it, like 36? 18, 38, right?
Mm-hmm.
38% comes from just standard 1. That means that you have to have a very thorough understanding of standard 1. And we'll rewind in a little bit and look a little bit more closely, because you see where standard 1 makes another appearance.
Yes, some occupational knowledge.
That means that one standard comes out possibly, theoretically, for a fact it comes out in 38% of the exam, just standard 1. Theoretically, it could go statistically speaking, it could come out in even more than that. So how important is it for you to understand standard 1 of your health science 6 through 12 document? It's very, very important. And so we're going to rewind just a little bit because it's worth so much. We're going to go back and look at standard 1 in the health science document. You can jump in whenever you have questions, Yesenia.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so remember, this is the health science. This is the standards document that the test maker was referring to. And they're saying of this domain, these are the standards that we focused on for these questions. And of this domain, these are the standards, and so on and so forth, and how much they're measured. So if you pay attention to what it is they're looking at, it can help you better prepare for the exam and be more successful, because you will have done a sort of very analytical deep dive into the right areas, instead of spending a whole bunch of time really going into all of it when you know one portion is deeply covered. So let's take a look at the standards document. This is the way that it's read. You have all the standards, which again, I showed you this before, they make up the competencies. They're rearranged and like regrouped however the test maker wants to do. They have to cover them all, period. They can give more importance to one, and they often do, as we saw in yours. Standard 1, which is, I'm going to read it for you. The health science teacher understands and applies knowledge of sciences needed in healthcare, biology, anatomy and physiology, chemistry, pathophysiology, epidemiology, and microbiology. Standard 1 is so important, and your knowledge and understanding and application of the skills in standard 1 that it appears in 3 of your 4 domains. So very important that we get a strong understanding. However, given that you've taken the exam, I would like to know on those 3 domains, specifically 1 and 2, what were your scores? If you can see them.
Let me get the picture.
Sure.
So academic foundations, would that be the first one?
Yeah, that first one is academic foundations.
There was a total of, you want to know the number of questions and how many I got correct?
That's correct.
Okay, there is a total of 15 and I got 5 correct.
Okay, next.
Medical sciences, there was 15 also and I got 8 correct.
Okay, next.
Occupational knowledge, there was 35 and I got 22. And then lastly, the professional responsibilities, there was 15 and I got 11 correct.
Okay, so we can make the most growth with domains 1 and 2, because you know, 1/3, it's like 30%, 35% or something like that, 37% for domain 1, and then something a little bit above that for domain 2. So we really, and domain 1 and 2 are only standard 1.
Yeah.
Only standard 1. So it behooves you to do a deep dive, which means that part of your homework is going to be looking through this document in a close reading way. And that means you'll either print it or you'll have it on your iPad or on your phone. You'll highlight, you'll write notes, questions for further clarification. Now I'm going to show you how to read the document. Now, on the following pages, you have the overarching standard, which is like thematically what the whole standard is about. And then it's broken down into substandards. And those substandards are broken left and right by their knowledge standards and then the application, the skill. And so the way that we read this, we have the overarching standard here, and we already identified it's just like everything, all the sciences needed for healthcare, essentially. You have to understand and apply the knowledge. But the way you read this document is on the left-hand side, everything listed on the left is what you need to know as far as knowledge. Okay. Reading, memorization, just like knowing the way that plants grow, the different structures of the human body, different systems, body's effort to maintain homeostasis, what that means, how it happens, what happens when it's out of homeostasis. Now, you have to know these things, but the big portion of it, Yesenia, for your exam, and every correct answer on the exam is going to come from the right-hand column. It is going to come from your application of your knowledge into the classroom with students. So not just what you know, what can you do with that knowledge in the classroom with the students? It's your application of it. Every correct answer choice on the exam will be a health science 6 to 12 teacher doing something from this side of the pages, from all of the pages. But for our purposes, we're going to do a very deep dive into standard 1. And so what would it look like? So you have to, on the left-hand side, know how to manage classroom, field, laboratory activities to ensure safety. So talking about safety procedures in all of the various environments that you will be. And for a health science teacher, that might be varied. You might be outside in the field somewhere, in a laboratory, in a like a medical facility. So and different types of laboratories, right? So your lab in the classroom is going to be very different than if you take your kids to like LabCorp or whatever. The practices that you would design, the instruction you would design before going to those things, the conversations you would have, they would differ and they would have to be varied. You wouldn't be able to have one safety conversation in the beginning of the school year for health sciences applicable to everything. With every new activity that they've never done, handling new tools, with new sort of what is it called, like if there's biohazards, any differing variation in their experience, we need to account for and make sure that we discuss it beforehand, that we provide and we employ safe practices, that we design instruction, that we plan instruction that helps prepare them for these new learning environments that they're going to learn, do this, the science and the history in. So that's what this would be like. So let's say that you have, your regular classroom in the beginning of the year, you go through your lab safety instruction, your activities, your assessments, they're good to go. But then you are going to take your students to the nearby creek to collect specimens, right? Should you review your Miss Yesenia's classroom safety practices? Should you, go outside and begin immediately because they know the safety practices? Should you discuss expectations and new practices for the new environment, reinforcing safety practices from your classroom? Or hand out a note the day before that we'll be going to a new location and have them research best practices? What would be the best thing? Anytime you're going to a new location, doing a new thing with health sciences, as far as safety is concerned, you're going to want to include them in the building and the knowing of what is expected, what is safe in this environment. And so the way that you would study for this is to go through each one of these and ask yourself, because you are going to be assessing your own knowledge. Because I don't know if you know the process of scientific inquiry and its role in instruction. I hope that you do. I'm sure that you do based on your scores and how well you did with the science portion of the other science portion of it. But so I know, but knowing the different parts of the scientific process and how we begin with a hypothesis and how we construct theories and models based on this process of inquiry. So that's you knowing it and you being able to analyze, review, critique strengths and weaknesses of scientific explanations, hypothesis, theories, and models. You have to be able to use it. So it's not just enough for you to know what a hypothesis is, but to be able to read a hypothesis and say, is this a legitimate hypothesis based on the empirical data that I have, and then be able to translate that with your students in instruction.
Okay.
So this, your content area and standard one is going to be a progression of all that is science. I'm going to erase this so I can show you that it's going to be a progression. So in the beginning, it starts very basic. It's super basic, like safety first, what is then history and nature, the scientific process, some limitations that we might have, the impacts that science, it's science on a very like broad scope, very large frame.
Okay.
Then you're going to get to more centralized human growth and development, microorganisms, the role of pathogens, infectious disease. But you're not just required to know those things. You are required to be able to apply it on the right-hand side. So relate the physiological function to the anatomical structures within the body systems. The students have to be able to do that. You have to be able to create lessons and activities where they would be able to show you, and then where they would be able to learn that information. And I'm going to go back because you can take a look at this a little bit further later, but I'm going to go back to the, where is it at?
So far it was page 1 and page 2, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And so this document here, this ebook, I like it because it gives you a lot more in depth of what you need for domains 1 and domains 2, more in depth than I've seen other study guides, which is why I utilize this. So part of your homework is going to be for you to marry or parallel the information in this document with your standard one, right? With what you should be able to do in that standard documents. And this one's nice because you can take, really nice notes on it, and it gives you extra stuff. I really like this particular study guide, and I have found with my students that they find this one more useful than others.
That was the domain, which one? I'm sorry.
So I'm going to show you. We were just looking at domain 1 right now. We were looking at domain 1, and we were looking at competency 1, I believe, and a standard 1.
Okay.
And when looking at the other one. So this one, this is domain 1, competencies 1 through 3. Remember, we were looking at the standards, and all of domain 1 comes from standard 1. So we were looking at the standard documents. This right here is a very good breakdown of the domains by competency, the way that they're on the exam. So this is still standard 1. It's just broken up the way that the test breaks it up. And the way that the test breaks up standard 1 is that it's mostly about the history of health science, the economic factors of health science, like the limitations, research, where we need to go, all that. Influence, how does society dictate? How does pandemics dictate healthcare trends? For instance, you could talk about and should talk about COVID and the new sort of changes in trends in healthcare as a result of this new international pandemic. Prevention and allocation of funds, allocation of ideas, education. That is the overarching thematic sort of summary of domain 1, and it breaks it apart. So here you have competency 1. Competency 1 is over mostly the major history trends in healthcare. And then it talks about the major history trends. Okay, Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare invention is a huge change in our healthcare, where there was a huge boost to the amount of people who were able to, and who preventative care became a thing after Medicare and Medicaid, because we realized, man, we won't have to spend so much money on insurance if we prevent people from being very sick later on in life. And so, but that was an influence that came after a historical change. So major trends in history affect healthcare. They affect public opinion and public behavior. Even think about now, I'm gonna wear a mask on public transportation always. Asians and people from Asia were always wearing masks. I'm talking about since the 90s, because of their trends, their healthcare behaviors, their healthcare trends, all of that is a little bit different because of their close quarters geographically, because of their massive, respiratory diseases, SARS, all that stuff that we didn't feel like they did. They had a different trend. And I noticed the trend. Even when I was little, I would always see Asian people at the airports wearing masks. But because they had a public policy, they had prior knowledge that we didn't have. We're slow on the train. We're like, now we're catching up. Competency 1 is about stuff like that, how we study stuff like that, how you discuss, and you should know different major trends and ways in which they've affected the way that we carry on healthcare wise. The different roles in prevention, the layers of prevention to keep people safe, individual, community-based prevention levels, the free clinics, Planned Parenthood, state clinics and resources. The Texas Department of Health and Human Services, not only do they have like workers set up to help people manage their care, they have like surveillance companies, like there's all this extra stuff going on to make sure that people are getting the care that they need when they need it, people aren't being taken advantage of, and that all laws are being observed. Competency 2 is mostly about scientific methods and the way that the scientific process and the process of inquiry is used in multiple disciplines. Even when we're studying like the stars, the scientific method, the scientific process is the same. When we're studying cancer, the scientific method, scientific process is the same. We're studying even the way that like anthropology, the way that like people engage and cultures grow and change, we're studying them through the same process. So it's multidisciplinary. It crosses all the disciplines, the way in which we inquire and learn about things. So teacher uses mathematics, physics, chemistry, and biomedical sciences to analyze situations and solve problems related to health sciences. This is a wonderful explanation or example of the health science teacher being a multidisciplinary instructor, a multidisciplinary educator. You have to be proficient in math, and not just like any math, like pretty advanced math. You have to know, those content specific, health specific vernacular terminology, medical terminology, and all that to be able to solve problems and analyze situations. So competency 2 is about you applying academic skills to health science. You understanding scientific method, we discussed that, the impact of science research on health, and experimental data. So we looked at that, and it'll go into different explanations with the different areas. How you use critical thinking skills, the different ways that we use inquiry. You can inquire by observing, we can classify, make inferences, compare, predict, all sorts of stuff. These are different skill levels. So like Bloom's taxonomy, knowledge skills, if I'm just defining things for you, that's basic knowledge. Comprehending, I'm telling you, this is what I understood. When you want to get to like the higher levels, it's going to be synthesis, where they're creating something, like creating a lab report based on their predictions and their data and their findings. That's something higher on Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, for the last competency in domain 1, which is still standard 1 in your your health science standards. It's going to be about jargon, and that's going to be like medical science, health science jargon, like, you know, DOA, that's jargon. It's also an acronym, but people say like DOA, and that's NPO, it's another acronym. But in any event, you know what I'm saying. There's certain things that you can say that's specific to healthcare, and certainly root words, suffixes, and prefixes, all of that very specific, content specific health care, health science and healthcare terminology, vocabulary. So it just goes into a whole bunch of extra things, and I'm sure you know, you're good with many of these.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're on to the nitty gritty. Now we're to domain 2. And remember, domain 2 is also 19, worth 19%. So domain 1 was worth 19%. Domain 2 is worth 19%. Collectively, they are worth 38%, and collectively, they are only on standard 1. But like I said, the state sends the standards, and the test maker sort of decides how they're going to weight the different sections. And they decided that standard 1 was very important, and that's why it is sort of spread out across several of the domains. And domain 2 looks at, in particular, medical sciences, all of the sciences that I read to you before, and how they correlate with the students, and what you must know from each of those particular areas. So let's take a look. And remember, it all comes from standard 1, which is your understanding of, oh wait, there was a lot more than that. So number competency 4 is over sort of like biology, like human growth and development, cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, homeostasis, and metabolism. So competency 3, it is the teacher understanding the anatomical structure of the human body. So it's anatomy and physiology. And whenever they say and, that part is equally important, the relationship to physiological functions and the processes to maintain homeostasis. So again, it's about anatomy and physiology, all of the functions in the human body and systems, and the process of maintaining homeostasis. And then it goes into a deep dive of all of those things if you need review. And it's very good. It's incredibly thorough.
Okay.
You have the difference of the different muscles, like short, flat, irregular, long. I know that they do ask some things that come out in this section do come out in the exam. So your peripheral nervous system section, the function, still continuing with anatomy and physiology, but it shows you like changes in structure can you know, lead to these conditions. Then you have pathogens, microbiology. So the teacher understands the relationship between microorganisms and health, and the role of microorganisms in infectious disease. So, you know, just understanding the history of it, the sort of the timeline briefly of microbiology, but then later really looking at like the different types of bacteria that there are, fungi, you know, protozoa, and what those things might cause, you know, the different types of, and clearly we don't want for you to memorize these, but you do have to have a working knowledge for the purposes of this exam. You have to have a working knowledge of these, and they might not ask you ask you directly, you know, which type of protozoa, blah, blah, blah. They might ask you like the students are, you know, discovering or researching different organisms or pathogens that cause diarrhea. Which of the following would not be a correct answer and would be a cause for concern for Miss Yesenia. And the answers are A, bacteria, B, protozoa, C, helminthes, I don't know how you say that, and D, viruses. And so the answers, it would say choose any of the ones not for diarrhea, and you would have to know or whatever. So they're going to ask you in a way where the students are having to do something that's a roundabout way of asking. So although you don't have to have them memorized, it is important for you to sort of recalibrate your understanding of the fundamentals and like the pathogens for sure, and whatever it is that they cause you is one of those like fundamentals.
Like I would have to know what category they would fall under?
I don't not you mean they're the disease?
Yeah.
Not really. You would just have to know the organism and possibly the symptoms. I don't think that,
Okay.
but they might ask you something like you know,
Okay.
like gastroenteritis or something like that, because that's part of like a disease of a system of the body, and so they could link that in some type of way. But they're not going to ask you about like T solium, what the disease is. That they're not going to do that.
Okay.
But just like the bigger ones that you should and would know, like salmonella, E. coli, hepatitis.
Okie dokie.
Knowing the differences of fungus, pit, like ones that come from poop and ones that are just like normal on our skin. Just being able to know that there are different kinds and where you might find them.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. Okay, so viruses, understanding the difference in the types of organisms, I think is important.
Okay.
Knowing how to treat the different ones, important. How infection happens for each of them, like the transmissibility of each of them, important. And here you have more different antibiotics. Again, I don't know how specific they get as far as like antibiotics, but just knowing what antibiotics are meant to treat, you know what I mean? You wouldn't say like, oh, fungus or something, like
Mhm.
that's not going to be when you're talking about it. So just being able to know at that level is important.
Okay.
The next is diseases and the many diseases, and a lot of them are overlap, and you have to remember that they all come from the same standard. So that's why some of them, and they all come from science and medicine, so there is a lot of overlap for these areas. So you have pathology, again, you have the different bacteria, diseases that are called excuse me, fungus, again, protozoa, again, the viruses. You would want to know congenital disorders, what they are, what they look like, what they cause. Certainly the stages of pathogenesis, incubation, and to be able to talk about those things like in context to even the COVID virus, you know what I mean? Like, and so the way that you would utilize something like this would be when you're teaching them these concepts, you would, whenever possible, try to illustrate the process of pathogenesis with something that they're familiar with, like chickenpox or the coronavirus, or something like food poisoning. Even like it's like immediate, you're not going to wait 2 or 3 days until you're going to start feeling pretty ill pretty fast, and there's a reason for that. And so like going on with your lesson from there. Again, with the antibiotics, medications for fungal, important to note, like nystatin used with like fungus, which is very normal, especially for breastfeeding mothers. Global considerations to diseases. It's always important to connect whenever possible what we're learning to the what we experience in the world, like our real world experiences. And so you know, whenever we're learning about these pathogens and these diseases and disorders, you know, to try to put it into perspective, to show, you know, why are we learning this? What is the connection? What are the implications? Like, where are we at as far as like, you know, doing more for rectifying people with AIDS or tuberculosis and whatnot. So being able to, and this is important, according to the WHO, 1 in every 2 deaths among children and adults under the age of 44, they're caused by only 6 infectious diseases. And so what does that mean? What are the implications for like where we should be spending our money? Those 6 ones are AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, measles, diarrheal disease, and acute respiratory like pneumonia. And you can probably add COVID because this was made a long time ago. But so most of it is respiratory. So we should really be if we know anything after COVID, we're not prepared for like a massive influx of disease with respiratory infections. And so just preparing for that, putting more research into that, understanding like how we can you know, create safer, cleaner environments so that the transmission is going down, and sort of reasons why we need to understand global considerations and why we would talk about them in our classroom. Okay, so again, competency, excuse me, domain 3, which is over competency 7 and 13. This is 44% of your tests. Add that to your 38% that is still, you know, standard 1. This one includes standard 1, standard 3, standard 4, and standard 6, right? So it has more than just standard 1, but collectively standard 1, you know, could come out in 80 something percent of the exam. It's very important for you to have a thorough understanding of everything that is standard 1. So talking about aging, this is still standard 1. Lifespan, aging, homeostasis, elderly, and gerontology, taking care of the elderly, or the, you know, the study of taking care of the elderly and everything encompassing that. So the aging process, social implications, not social like as in family, social as in community, the economy, like what happens when a large swath of the population is now retired, no longer working, and now have all these diseases and disorders. It's going to be a problem economically, and talking about those things, thinking about things and why we would, you know, take those things into consideration. Talking about physical decline, physical changes that happen throughout life. Obviously, the normal human growth and development, that it's continuous, it's universal, it's progressive. We go from birth and then until puberty we grow, and then there's like a bit of a decline until death. The musculoskeletal changes, all the other changes, digestive, skin, hair, the whole shebang, mental changes, what that means for society based on mental changes. And so your content area is so very important. I wish more students took it, because more people need to be thinking about like how we can change not only like politics to better suit our healthcare needs, but like we would do better as a society if we took better care of ourselves early on, and we understood how much like an unhealthy society affects everything, affects our ability to grow as a society, our ability to thrive economically, like you know, invention wise. I mean, just as everything is touched. So very important that you're doing what you're doing. The pharmacological needs that are needed, and how they, you know, increase as age increases, attitudes towards the elderly, and that differs among cultures. The attitude in America towards our elderly is very different than the attitude in Mexico. It is very different than the attitude in Japan or China. So in America, we're perfectly happy, it would seem, via empirical data, putting our elderly, our wise, our family members in homes and sort of like relegating them to the care of someone else. Whereas in other societies, the care and the attention to those that are wise, it's more of a privilege. It's seen as something that is like tradition and a sign of respect. And there are cultural differences. So and then they're based on the way that we see them. Like other cultures see their old as not frail or senile or difficult or a burden, but as a resource, as wise, as like experienced. And so depending on the synonym you attach to age is really the way in which you're going to treat them. Are there any questions?
No, you're good.
Okay, and then continuing with all the issues with the elderly, then we get to nutrition. What are nutrients? What does it have to do with our body, and what do we know works for the body? Because there have been changes in nutritional trend. There have been diet fads. There are therapeutic diets. There are situations where people have sicknesses or disorders related to their nutritional intake, which then decreases their vitamins and like life expectancy. And so the USDA has guidelines for what this is the baseline that you need in order to do the functioning you need to be able to do and still, follow along steady human growth and normal human growth and development. So you would analyze nutritional information, including information on food labels, assess and describe nutritional needs with different populations, including those with therapeutic diets and those that with special eating disorders. So like like if you had someone who was trying to train for, I don't know, like a muscle competition, like a weightlifting competition, that diet would be very different than someone who would, and then eating plan would be very different than someone who was like, bulimic or anorexic nervosa. So depending on what you have depends on the needs, of the diet, on the needs of the patient. Food additives, supplements, alternative methods of nutrition, and needs for alternative methods of nutrition. So there are some people who, for whatever reason, body cannot absorb things and they have to take their nutrients in a different way. I just had to get an iron infusion because my body doesn't absorb iron well if it's via my digestive tract. And so for whatever reason, there's that disconnect. And after so long, my body is depleted. It does absorb, it just doesn't absorb well. And so I will be depleted at some time because I'm a woman and I menstruate and I lose blood and I also lose iron and whatnot throughout the time. And so if I don't get a bolus of intravenous iron infusion, then despite however many iron rich foods I eat or iron capsules, vitamins I take, it won't matter. And so that alternate method of nutrition is therefore prescribed for me.
I do remember a question regarding nutrition in the test, but I don't remember exactly what it was. I think it was regarding the label, like the nutrition label in the back.
Right. And being able possibly to read it, or
I
how?
don't recall exactly because it's been a while since I took the test, but I do remember, I think I had to do something with the calories or I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember they gave me a picture of the nutrition label in the back and I had to interpret something of it, but I don't recall exactly what it was.
So for the back of for the nutritional needs, like the USDA, and it's based on our body, and it really is not that formulaic where you could just say like, oh, this is your body mass index and this is what you need. It's a little bit nuanced because I have a body mass index, and if you were to take just Like if I were to go off of just what the USDA guidelines, like I probably would not meet my nutritional needs because my body is a little different and I have malabsorption. I burn way more calories than normal because my heart rate is always like a little bit more elevated. So I burn more calories from fat. So, but on average, we get your caloric intake and what you need based on a mathematical equation. So we take the amount of fat and energy that you're going to get out of it and calculate how much you can have. And obviously, if you go over and you don't utilize, if you don't spend that energy, then those extra molecules of nutrition, whether they be fat or otherwise, they are going to be stored if they're not used then. And that's where we get, fat deposits and fat storage. If you use more than your intake, you will then have to take or extract from your fat deposits or your fat bank. And that's when you lose fat, when you are, taking in less than you are expending energy wise. Okay, so this is important to track the diets and to track the intake. You have to take it down. You just have to track the intake, what you're eating, weighing, and sort of like make sure that you are monitoring the intake of it. It tells you physical signs of the different disorders associated with nutrition and eating, what you would look for. Typically with anorexia, they're, severely low in weight. They don't have a period. Their hair is thinning. They're always freezing because they literally have no, think about like a whale and how a whale has blubber to keep it warm in these cold temperatures. We don't have blubber, but we certainly have layers of skin and fat that help insulate our body and maintain temperature that we need in order for homeostasis to happen. You don't have that whenever you are anorexic. Make sure you always look at the world impacts because they always want to make a connection to like how is all of these different aspects of like vitamins and nutrition. Who cares? Why does it matter? What is the point? Well, it has a larger implication with our communities and the smaller communities, as in the city we live in, the state we live in, the country we live in, and then the world that we occupy, and how those different um, access to nutrition, access to food, access to education about what is healthy and what you need to ingest in order to maintain the energy levels that you have, and what sort of impacts or ramifications does that have on you as the teacher and the students as the students. 27% of children in developed countries do not eat enough. That is ridiculous. That is 27% in a developed country. Can you imagine those numbers in underdeveloped and developing countries?
Yeah,
if
crazy.
27% are not receiving by the dictated, scientifically measured nutritional count, 27% of all children in developed, that means us, China, all the good ones, they are not receiving what they need, which is a failure on us because there's enough food to go around. And there's no reason that a child should be hungry and or nutrient deficient, point blank, period.
Yeah.
Next, we have pharmacology, pharmacokinetics, and the mechanism of action. So, description of the highlights. The health science teacher uses drug references and other technology to access information about drug names, generic brands, and brand names, discussing what that means, discussing what it means to be a brand name. What dictates that you're a brand name? Oh, it just means that they've stopped people from creating a cheaper version. You came out with it first, And so you have, sometimes they stop all generic production for this many years to allow them to make maximum profits. It's all political and money wise. But once we get a generic, chemically, and this would where your chemical discussions and why you need to know chemistry, chemically, the chemical equations of the generic pharmaceutical to its brand name counterpart are identical. They must be, unless the FDA will not sell them. That's how they can be a generic, because they're the exact chemical makeup. They just have a different generic name. They're not the brand name that it was invented with. But many times because of politics, because of lobbying, different pharmaceutical companies will lobby for brand name sort of lockdown. Apple had a brand name lockdown, and only Apple stores and only one carrier, AT&T, used to be able to sell Apple phones. And it was like that for very, very many years. It was written in the contract until that expired. Many of our new medicines and many of our old medicines went through the same process. They started off with a brand name. That brand name was the only thing available, and its price was dictated by its markers or its manufacturers. And they had a hold on it. They had a hold on the entirety of the market until whatever Congress of the powers that be said that other people could come in and give us a cheaper option. And so there's a lot of misconceptions between generic and brand, and a lot of people don't want to have generic because just the name sounds like you want a brand, you want the Gucci of your medicines. But it turns out Gucci and H-E-B brand are exactly the same brand. Discussing those things, all relevant information, being able to identify the different classifications of drugs, drug names, the process by going through the administration, the different types of administration, oral, intravenous, rectally, through a feeding tube, whatever administration you're doing. So anything having to do with pharmacology. Locally activating drugs, topical drugs, side effects, all that good stuff. Mental health, big one, needed one, important one. Mental health, what it means, what it is not, what it should be. Mental illness, what it is, what it should be, what it is not. Mental disorders, and stress, and how stress, everyday stress for all humans, can affect anyone's mental health. That everybody has mental health. Everybody has mental health. Now, do you have good mental health, stress mental health, at the moment, bad mental health? If you're experiencing a breakdown, what is the range? People have physical health and they have mental health. And what they don't understand is that we constantly, just like we need to be keeping tabs and making sure that we're physically fit and that our physical health is maintained and up to par, so too is that true for our mental health. However, because of the society that we live in, because of the stigma of like mental disorders, mental illness, the way that it's portrayed in movies, TV, society, the news, there's a lot of sort of hesitance and lack of wanting to seek out even a baseline for mental health. How am I doing? I mean, I really love my psychiatrists. Like, I have had many, depending on what insurance carrier worked with and who they accepted. And I love all of them. And I wish I could see them every day, because it's like someone you could talk to that can help you process through things that maybe you didn't learn how to process, or maybe you looked at it a wrong way. It's excellent. They give you coping strategies, just like they would give you exercise strategies if your physical health were not okay. Like, let's say you need to strengthen your leg muscles, they'll give you leg muscles to work with. You get panic attacks, these are the types of exercises you do. And so this particular competency is so important. Understanding concepts, social, cultural issues related to mental health. This is what we were discussing about. What are the issues concerning and revolving around mental health? There are many, and even within the same society, like we're the American society. Within the American society, there are differences in concepts, understandings, and attitudes towards mental health. In the Mexican American culture, mental health is much less looked upon as something that's needed and desired than it is in maybe, the Irish American or in New York City. So in the Valley, their ideas about mental health are going to be a little bit different than the ideas of mental health in Austin. So where you are geographically, who you are culturally, what you and who you exist with socially, all undermines and adds to, highlights different concepts, ideas, misconceptions, and attitudes towards mental health. And those ideas, they all, they all impact whether or not someone is likely to seek out mental health help. I'm going to have to let you go, and we're going to have to reconvene at a later time. So
That's
email
fine.
me if you want to set up another lesson, and also go in. We talked about those particular competencies that you need to look at. Look through this booklet and make sure you have a good understanding of all of what you need to know and what you need to be able to do for those competencies.
I will. I'm gonna print out the whole workbook or that sheet that you sent. That,
Sure.
that way I can start highlighting and reading over and hopefully be ready soon.
Absolutely. That would be awesome. And you let me know if you want to meet again, and we'll touch base. And I'm also going to upload like I told you, I found the other one. I was looking through them today, and I found the other health science. I'll upload that for you, and I'll send you the links to both of those.
Okay, yes, please. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. I appreciate your time, and good luck. Remember, think positive. You
Okay.
have the tools necessary to beat the test next time.
I will. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Have a good one. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.